So as Michael said, my name's Andy Ray. I have a dual role where I'm software engineer, a senior software engineer at the University of Nottingham, but I'm also head of research software at Nottingham University Hospitals. I lead platform development for the NHS East Midlands secure data environment or trusted research environment, depending on the phrasing. I prefer secure over trust often. So whilst I work deeply in the kind of vicinity of TREs and federated analytics, I wanted to preface by this saying almost none of what I'll talk about is my work. I'm somewhat adjacent to the products and development that I lead, but unfortunately no one from our team was quite available. It is late August after all, but I am well equipped, and I think actually listening to Christian's talk, I'll be able to extend on some of the points he mentioned, and actually I found myself realizing that actually I probably am the person to talk in retrospect. So I'll give a little more overview of the EOSC and Trust details that Christian mentioned, as well as the HDR UK federated analytics. I can't always promise I'll be able to answer your questions, but I can get back to you or know someone who will. So start with, just dive straight in. I've quickly moved around some slides and deleted some things that Christian covered, but this kind of context I think is a good one to start with, kind of the underlying story of moving from a one-to-one relationship that kind of requires trust between the custodian and researcher to a many-to-many. And this is kind of the sector maturity kind of journey we find ourselves on, providing consistency around like governance, standards, policies, and then interoperable technology as well. Because in the health space, this is kind of secure use of health data is very difficult. The data is very fragmented, and kind of lengthy data processes access. It can take sometimes years for researchers to really access the data they need. The data governance frameworks that are used, they can be very complex and significant complex for researchers, adding time delay. Those governance frameworks are often different as well. So then linking data sources is very difficult and sometimes completely impossible. There's a lack of common standards and not a whole lot of not only technology kind of interoperability, but governance interoperability and data interoperability. So it becomes very difficult to move data generally, especially maintaining privacy and security and meeting what actually is the endpoint, which is the researchers and the user needs here. But what's happening is somewhat of a kind of a revolution. We have a diversity of architectures and approaches, but as Christian mentioned, there's enable kind of frameworks are emerging to provide consistency along this journey. I like to think of it generally as one of empathy, empathy for not only the custodian and the controllers, data controllers, but empathy for the researcher and the users, and making a better experience for everybody, and increased empathy for everyone, I find quite useful. To talk about EOSC and Trust, as Christian mentioned, this is, I think, 15 or 17 European countries come together. This is kind of acknowledging the idea that many places, many countries and institutions, they've already made large investments in secure environments to kind of meet this needs of research analysis of sensitive health data. So there are many of these environments now existing and working, which are often kind of linked to national centres or individual organisations or specific even research communities. But the fragmentation there is the challenges for the users, but the providers as well. Researchers, as I mentioned, they have many different systems, they have many different access procedures. And then providers, we need to provide kind of federated access across often kind of multiple and probably potentially incompatible technology, and then the governance frameworks that comes with that. So EOSC, it kind of emerges to create that common blueprint for the federated data. So it's quite a significantly large program. I think there are 22 work packages in the program, and generally bringing operations, I think, from about 15 countries with a shared goal to kind of create that European framework. Shared standards of technical, but legal, operational, and kind of just a general language to communicate about this area. This blueprint is kind of anchored in, yeah, I think legal, organizational, technological, and semantic, really. I'm going to mostly talk about this little bit of it, the safe workflow processing, which is just one element of it. This is to do with combination of RO crates and workflow processing, providing that kind of interoperability at a technical level in the framework, and workflow actual execution, so actually running it and actually kind of querying databases and how that might work. So how one such framework for supporting that, as Christian mentioned, the 5 saves framework, it's just really useful because it means I don't have to talk about it very much. So I won't. I'll skip over that. I feel as though Christian did a great job of explaining that, and I have nothing to add. However, one such framework or one such technology we use to support that framework is an RO crate. An RO crate, or a research object crate, is a method for actually packaging research data with structured metadata and supporting the kind of the FAIR principles of data sharing, all kind of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It's kind of, imagine gathering the data in a file or a collection of files, which can be accompanied with a further metadata file. And inside that metadata file might be a name, description, type, author, license, all this kind of metadata that adds further information about the research. We can also reference external objects, and as well as very much about how the research was actually executed and even governed. And I'll talk a little bit about this. This is kind of a middleware research kind of object exchange format, I suppose, which might sound fancy, but actually I won't talk about how complex it is, because it's actually quite elegant. At its most simplest form, it is research outputs zipped in a zip file with JSON metadata to support that. And I think that's always nice to kind of say, actually, this is not an incredibly onerous format. It's one that can be useful and, crucially, actually human readable, as well as being machine readable. And there's kind of very useful side of it. So I think I have a little video to support this. This describes actually a federated query into a secure environment, and looking through the RO crate file to support that. The query uses, it's a medical standard OMOP, which is kind of a standard term for describing medical terms. And we use Hutch, a tool we developed to support federated analysis to execute the query. And an RO crate is actually created along this journey. And the RO crate can effectively hold a lot of information. So we can see, for example, it holds the data set and it holds some references to it, when it was created, some entities that it points to and how it was created. And we actually see it mentions, we have the query, the actual query that came down from our database, but it also mentions checks and validation steps, as well as sign-off steps. All of these mechanisms are actually captured alongside with the research, and that's crucial. So you have a safe project with Hutch, a safe organization with the University of Nottingham mentioned, and we can see that a safe person as well, Jonathan, just there. Inside the actual query, because the query is accompanied with the research, we can see the owner or user one. We can see the actual query that took place. So we can see it's searching, I believe, for an OMOP code equals 319049. A code. I don't want to guess which one that is. And we can see that what this actually entails in packaging it all together in one RO crate, and what that will entail, and a workflow language that describes the steps that were taking place in order to deliver that query. All of this packaged in one file that provides a great kind of interoperability and reuse in a safe way. So I'll skip ahead a bit. So the RO crate supporting those 5 safes is a way of having that single unit of execution for the project, but adding that documentation throughout that journey. So this a query might submit it to the TRE, it's reviewed, it's processed, disclosure control takes place. There's various supporting documents, maybe multiple disclosure control steps take place, but they're all captured alongside the research. And it provides that kind of single document in a kind of a neutral and also extensible way of describing this. And to the point in which on the left we have a fairly typical architecture of a kind of TRE with queries and submissions and execution, but the RO-Crate can actually mirror that journey almost. This isn't particularly tightly controlled either. An RO-Crate can be flexible, and there is freedom for how they're updated in their kind of life cycle, if you will. So we see it going through the check, validation, workflow sign-off, workflow execution, as well as finally disclosure and publishing. And throughout this journey, the RO-Crate is continually updated and designed to support those 5 safes and acknowledging where did this data come from and how and when. And finally, so that's my kind of small whirlwind tour of some of the details of some of the work happening in this space by us. Ultimately, we're developing those kind of mechanisms, architectures, and blueprints to deploy across multiple TREs. Some of it's architecture, some of it's actual software, and kind of everything has a focus on interoperability. And to mirror what I said at the beginning, our general mission is to increase empathy for the users and the controllers, and for the technologists who will actually ultimately deploy and develop this software as well, and doing so in an open way, in an open source way as well. So finally, I think I have some acknowledgements. As I mentioned, none of this is really my work. So a testament to the work of following, particularly Carol and Tim, Phil Quinlan, and so on, and Jonathan Coolidge for the small video as well.